Nouriel Rubini has a note out to clients today. He says, Greece is the tip of the iceberg. He says, we have got to realize that this is a new crisis. Is it that bad, Mohammed?
Two issues here, Michelle. One is something that you've heard us say over and over again, which is 2010 is the year of sovereign risk. It's the year that every market has to take seriously the fact that the public finances in advanced economies are offside. The second issue is that we've seen a crisis start in a country, Greece, become regional, impact the whole of the Eurozone, and it's on the verge of truly going global. And the reason why are that the banks, the European banks today, Michelle, are under pressure. And that is the transmission mechanism to go from country to region to global. So we should take this very seriously.
So I think an American sitting at home watching us right now is wondering, what does that mean to me and the U.S. stock market, the U.S. bond market, and any exposure that they have?
There is a silver lining, which is we're going to see more and more capital that either is in Europe or was going to go to Europe get diverted to the U.S. So ironically, one can argue that this is good for the U.S. because you get more capital. However, there's a couple of other things going on. This is a deflationary shock to Europe, which means that global demand is going to go down at a time when the cyclical bounce was starting to face headwinds. Secondly, risk aversion is going up, which means that the capital is not going to all the markets in the U.S., it's going into the bond market in the U.S. The thing we should worry about going forward is the European banking system. I cannot stress how important it is to keep an eye on that.
And is that what will be the trigger that will move this, if indeed it happens, Mohammed, from a regional concern such as Europe, the Eurozone, and make it a global event? Would it be failures in the European banking system, or will the mechanism be something else? What event do you think would trigger that?
So what we're seeing today is something we saw in Lehman, not as bad, but same characteristic, which is European Bank A says to European Bank B, I don't know how much PIG exposure you have. And until I figure that out, I'm going to step back. European Bank B says, well, that's okay because I don't know how much exposure you have. So what you see is the system slowly starting to have cascading failures. It's like a pipe that you need to be free-flowing,
right,
and it starts getting clogged, and that's the concern.
But given that a year ago, the world's biggest banks had to deal with these kinds of fears, are we not better prepped for this, better hedged? Shouldn't the smartest banks already have gotten this figured into their strategies?
We are better off because there's a lot more capital, especially in the U.S. banks. So this is not 2008. This is not me calling my wife and tell her, go to the ATM and take money out because I'm not sure whether the banks are going to open tomorrow. No, this is not 2008. Nevertheless, this is a shock to the system that's going to have an impact on valuation.
Are you heartened at all, Mohammed, that Spain was able to successfully complete its debt offering today? Yes, they had to up the rate, but I think most people were expecting they would have to do that. But there was a lot of speculation in the market that would be a failed auction, and it was not. Is that encouraging at all?
It is somewhat encouraging, but again, we have to look at what actually happened. And it's similar to what happened in Greece. The auction gets done, but very quickly, the people who bought the auction are underwater. And that's what has happened today. So the ability to get the next auction done has gone down.
So, Mohammed, you say watch the European banks. They're in peril. Is the European regulatory structure sufficient to rescue or save any banks that go under? In other words, educate me about what happens there. We know what happens in the United States. The FDIC takes over the banks and figures out a way to unwind them and have them get bought. What goes on in Europe?
So let me give you a general image that comes from 2.5 days of discussion that we had here at PIMCO, both with our colleagues around the world and with outsiders. The global economy now is like a car that has used its spare tire. The spare tire was used in the 2008-2009 crisis. So if you hit a big pothole, there isn't a spare tire. In Europe right now, every national jurisdiction is asking the question, how do I stabilize my banking system? So what you risk having in Europe is a fragmentation of the Eurozone. And if that happens, that will increase risk premia around the world.
All right, so we've been talking up here, high altitude. Let's get down to brass tacks. The euro, $1.26. Where does it go from here? Is Greece actually going to default? What would you pay for their debt at this point?
Okay, let's start with Greece. It's not just a liquidity issue, it's a liquidity and solvency. The package announced on Sunday was big, 110 billion euros, but it didn't deal with solvency. The only solution for Greece is to deal with its debt stock. There are only two ways of doing that. Either the European Union gives very concessional money, think of money at zero interest rate, or Greece restructures. There is no other solution to a solvency problem.
Mohammed, does the Eurozone as we know it now survive? And does the euro survive? I mean, John Taylor of FX Concepts wrote today that basically, in his opinion, the euro is finished. It won't happen tomorrow, but it probably will not exist as it is now 4 or 5 years from now.
I think there's a high probability that the Eurozone as we know it today will look different in a year's time. Whether it's different institutions or different members remains to be seen. I suspect it will be both. Mm-hmm. The euro, I think, survives. What you're going to see is the possibility not only of fragmenting into national states, but also having a smaller Eurozone. Is Eurozone of the like, of people who have had fiscal discipline. And
like Germany and France to a certain extent.
One of our guests yesterday, Mohammed, said he thought there was a 95% likelihood that the euro would survive and be around in 5 years, but there was a similar 95% probability that some countries would opt out of the euro. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you may well see the weaker countries take a sabbatical, and then there's going to be a question as to how do they resume their role. Mm-hmm. But remember, if you're Germany right now, you have 3 different objectives you can pursue. One is you can pursue the existing Eurozone, support the existing Eurozone, but you better be ready to write very large checks. Second, you can pursue a narrow Eurozone. And thirdly, you can pursue national interest. I suspect that we're going to see them go from objective number 1, pursue a wide Eurozone, to the reality of objective number 2.
Mohammed, what are the lessons for the United States as we look at Greece? Are we on the same fiscal path?
We are on the same fiscal path. We are not Greece. We have more time. But what the Greek crisis tells you is, first, debt and deficits matter. Secondly, flexibility matters. The structure of your deficit matters, and the U.S. doesn't have much flexibility. And thirdly, don't underestimate how quickly this can happen. It speaks to a bigger issue, Michelle, which is there are structural headwinds out there, and we better get our act together before these structural headwinds become overwhelming.